Hi, I'm Stewart from Australian Clutch. Today I'm going to run through some basic checks you can use before you install a brand new kit into a vehicle. I'm just going to run through how you check your pressure plate, your disc, your release bearing, your pilot bearing, and make sure that they're suitable for your transmission and your engine before you actually install them. The first thing we're going to check is the thrust bearing. We're just going to check that suits the fork, and we just slide it in there, make sure it's not too loose, make sure it's actually the correct style. Many manufacturers change their forks and bearings depending on what model it is through years. What we also need to check is the inner diameter of the release bearing suits the transmission, so we just slide that on there, make sure it's not too loose or too tight. The next thing to check is the contact diameter on the bearing to make sure that suits the diaphragm of the pressure plate. So what we'll do there is just sit it on top, make sure that it doesn't fall through, make sure that it has a nice contact area onto the edge of the diaphragm there where it can operate smoothly. The second component to check is the friction disc. The first thing we're going to do is chuck the disc onto the input shaft and just make sure the spline's correct. Just slide that on there, check it actually slides back and forth, and make sure there's no significant wobble on there where it could be loose. We also want to check that the spring cage has clearance on the inner diameter of the casting, and we also want to check that the facing inner and outer diameters are a good match for the casting diameter here. So we just slide that on top of the pressure plate like that, move it around a bit, check that there's no interference and that the facings are the correct diameter. The next component to check is the pilot bearing or spigot bearing. We just want to check that the inner diameter is nice and smooth on the end of the input shaft there. You don't want it to be too loose or too tight. We also want to check that the outer diameter is going to be a nice fit to the back of the crank, or in this instance the actual flywheel. So you can see when you place that on there with a little tap from a nylon hammer, that's going to locate perfectly in there. The last thing to check is that our pressure plate and our clutch disc are both suitable for the flywheel. So what we'll do is just check that the back side of the spring cage there isn't interfering at all with the flywheel. Make sure that's not hitting at all and it can move around a bit. And then all we do to check the dowel pins onto the pressure plate and make sure that they all line up and are a nice snug fit to prevent any flexing of the cover during operation.